This is all you think I am worth to you.
I am trying to help you, but you make it very difficult.
Millionaire refused to pay. Waitress, calling her worthless, her powerful. Comeback stunned everyone. The restaurant was alive with the sounds of clinking glasses, soft laughter, and quiet conversations as people enjoyed their meals. In the midst of it all, a young waitress moved gracefully from table to table, balancing plates and trays with practiced ease. Though she had been on her feet for hours, her smile never faded, and her tone remained polite and kind as she tended to every guest. She carried herself with quiet dignity, even in the face of exhaustion. But everything shifted when she approached a man seated at the corner table. He was a millionaire, his presence impossible to miss. Dressed in an expensive suit, boasting a watch that glimmered under the lights, and surrounded by the air of wealth and arrogance. After finishing his extravagant meal, the waitress politely placed the bill on the table, expecting a routine transaction. Instead of reaching for his wallet, the man leaned back with a smug smirk and scoffed at her. With a voice loud enough for others to hear, he called her worthless, claiming that someone like her wasn't even worth a tip. His words cut through the noise of the restaurant like a knife, and silence followed. Diners turned their heads, shocked by his cruelty, while the waitress stood still, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, humiliation weighed heavily on her shoulders, but behind her eyes burned a strength that refused to be crushed. The millionaire wasn't done. He laughed cruelly, insisting that money was the only true power and that people like her existed only to serve those above them. He bragged about his wealth, mocking her for working long hours for so little, as if her hard work had no meaning. Some customers looked away uncomfortably, unwilling to witness the humiliation, while others whispered in outrage at his arrogance. The waitress, however, refused to crumble under his insults. She stood her ground, her silence unnerving him, her calm gaze refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. It was clear to everyone watching that she wasn't powerless. She was choosing her moment. Finally, with quiet composure, she spoke. Her voice was steady, filled with a strength that silenced the man's arrogance instantly. She told him that money could buy luxury, but it could never buy respect. She reminded him that true worth wasn't measured by the balance in a bank account, but by the character and kindness a person showed to others. Every word struck harder than the last, and the entire restaurant listened intently. She revealed that her work was not a sign of weakness but a step toward her own dreams, dreams built on dignity, perseverance, and self-respect. The room filled with applause, the sound echoing louder than the millionaire's insults had moments earlier. His smirk disappeared, replaced by embarrassment as the realization hit him. He was the one exposed as worthless in character. Forced to face the weight of every eye in the room, the man grudgingly paid the bill and left behind a tip that was far larger than usual. Yet the money was meaningless now. What truly mattered was that the waitress had turned humiliation into triumph. Her powerful comeback reminded everyone present that dignity cannot be stolen, and that respect belongs to those who carry themselves with integrity. That night, she walked away not as a victim, but as a victor, her story leaving a lasting mark on every soul who witnessed it. The millionaire's voice rose with every sentence, dripping with arrogance as he mocked the young waitress who stood quietly before him. He leaned back in his chair, boasting loudly that people like her existed only to serve the wealthy, that her long hours of labor meant nothing compared to the life of luxury he enjoyed. His words carried across the restaurant, making nearby diners shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet the scene unfolding, while others whispered in anger at the cruelty on display. The atmosphere, once filled with laughter and soft conversation, now felt heavy with tension. Yet, through it all, the waitress stood in silence, her expression calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She did not flinch at his insults, nor did she allow his words to pierce her dignity. Instead, her stillness unsettled him, for he expected her to cry, to argue, or to walk away defeated. The man chuckled to himself, convinced he had broken her spirit, and bragged even louder about the power of money, declaring that wealth was the only true measure of a person's worth. But what he failed to see was that the woman standing across from him carried a strength far greater than the glittering watch on his wrist or the expensive suit on his back. Her silence was not weakness. It was preparation, the gathering of words that would soon cut deeper than his arrogance ever could. The diners around them sensed it too, leaning in as though waiting for a storm. The millionaire's laughter echoed, but the power he thought he held was slipping away with every moment. She refused to be shaken. In her quiet stance, there was resilience, the kind that comes not from wealth, but from struggle, dignity, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. The silence that had settled over the restaurant seemed almost heavy as the waitress finally lifted her head and spoke, her voice calm yet carrying a weight that cut through the arrogance of the man before her like a blade. Every word was deliberate, steady, and filled with a truth that could not be ignored. She told him that money may buy meals, clothes, cars, and houses, but it could never buy respect, compassion, or character. She explained that true worth was not counted in gold or measured in wealth, but revealed through the way one treated others, especially those who served. The room fell utterly still, forks frozen in midair, conversations halted, as every guest turned their attention to her words. The millionaire, who had moments earlier smirked with unshakable confidence, felt the corners of his lips falter, his proud expression cracking as the force of her words pressed against him. She did not stop there. She went on to tell him that her life as a waitress was not a symbol of weakness, but a reflection of her strength, because it meant she chose dignity over dependence, honest work over easy shortcuts. Every tray she carried and every order she served was not a sign of failure, but another step toward the future she was building with her own two hands. Her voice never wavered as she told him that she might wear a uniform and stand on tired feet, but she held more pride in her labor than he could ever find in all his riches. The air shifted in that moment, and the tension turned into admiration, as the truth of her message rippled through the room. Slowly, people began to clap, first in soft taps, then louder and louder, until the sound of applause filled the restaurant. The echoes of their claps drowned out every insult the millionaire had hurled at her, their support turning her quiet defiance into an unforgettable victory. The man, who had enjoyed humiliating her, now stood red-faced, realizing that the eyes of every person in the room were no longer laughing with him, but watching him with judgment and disappointment. He had come to embarrass her, but instead he had been silenced by her strength, his arrogance shattered by the power of a woman who refused to let her worth be defined by money. In that moment, the waitress became more than just a server to everyone present. She became a symbol of resilience, of self-respect, and of the undeniable truth that dignity can never be bought or taken away. The millionaire sat frozen, his face flushed with the sting of humiliation as the weight of every eye in the restaurant pressed down on him. Only minutes earlier he had been the loudest voice in the room, boasting of wealth, mocking the very woman who had served him with grace. But now his laughter had vanished, replaced by the silence of shame. The waitress, calm and unshaken, stepped forward and placed the bill on the table once more, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering, a quiet reminder that he owed not just for the meal, but for the disrespect he had tried to cover with arrogance. For the first time that evening, the man's confidence faltered as he realized that the power he thought his money gave him had crumbled in front of strangers who now judged him not by his riches, but by his lack of decency. The waitress did not gloat, did not taunt, and did not mirror his cruelty. Instead, she stood with quiet dignity, showing that strength does not always roar, but sometimes speaks in silence that refuses to bend. Reluctantly, he reached for his wallet, his hands trembling as he pulled out not just enough to cover the bill but a tip far larger than anyone had ever seen from him before, an offering not of generosity but of defeat, a desperate attempt to patch the image he had destroyed. Yet, The money no longer mattered, because the room had already chosen its victor, and it was not the man in the expensive suit, but the woman in the humble uniform who had carried herself with unshakable pride. The diners, who had watched in silence, now whispered words of admiration for her, some smiling, some nodding in approval, while others clapped softly once again, their applause now a farewell to the moment she turned humiliation into triumph. The man shoved back his chair and hurried out, shoulders hunched, his once commanding stride replaced with the hurried steps of a man who wished to disappear. But the waitress did not chase his exit with bitterness. Instead, she stood tall, breathed deeply, and carried on with her work as though nothing had broken her spirit, because nothing ever had. That night, she walked away not with extra money in her pocket, but with the respect of everyone who had witnessed her strength, and with the certainty that her value had never depended on the approval of the arrogant. In the story that spread beyond the walls of the restaurant, it was not the millionaire's name that people remembered, but the lesson the waitress had taught, that dignity can never be stolen, self-respect can never be bought, and true power belongs not to those with wealth, but to those who refuse to bow before arrogance.